Yeah, so the district where I'm running in is in very bottom of South Florida. So it includes a portion of Southwest Miami-Dade, and it also includes Monroe County and Key West. Those are the most populous areas of my district. And after that, it's going to be just a lot of empty space. I don't know if that's like how far back you wanted me to start, but
Mhm.
that so that's basically the places where there's a lot of where there's people. A lot of the space in that county is like the Everglades and uninhabitable, not necessarily uninhabitable, but areas where people can't live because of environmental protection rights. So it's not gonna it's a lot of empty space there. And when it comes to the incumbent of Carlos Jimenez, he used to be the mayor of Miami-Dade County, but after he ran out his 2 terms. He then started to run for Congress. He doesn't have any, as I said earlier, he doesn't have any real positions. It's not he doesn't have any particular ideological stances. He positions himself the most advantageous of what is most likely to get him to win. So, like you said earlier, he was a Hillary supporter in 2016 because the political climate was slightly different before Trump became president. But after Trump became president, it was almost impossible for him to win in any kind of Republican ticket and not be a full-on Trump supporter. So his positions have moved very far right. But in terms of what he believes, it's not any kind of ideological stance. He's not ideologically a Trump supporter. He's just whatever is most likely for him to win. So that way he can maintain power and continue to profit for himself and his real constituents, which are the corporate masters of our society.
What most disturbed me was the fact that he bought into the claim that Trump has made regarding the election fraud, and he voted to reject the votes from Pennsylvania and Arizona in Congress on that day in January 6th. And that kind of, to me, is a very disturbing thing in terms of his willingness to sacrifice democracy itself for political positions. I noticed he is extremely in the middle of the political map, almost by design. Like, you could see that he's formed his political position to be smack in the middle, a tiny bit on the Republican side, but his basically. Uh, it to me that indicates pretty much what you're saying, that he doesn't have a ideological point, and he's not leading but rather following his his constituency. But that goes back to the democratic position that people, centrists, believe that if they position themselves to the center as much as possible, they would be able to get the election quotas that are necessary. But your
Yeah,
positions are very different, aren't they?
yeah, no, for sure. Like I don't know. I would necessarily at this point call him a necessarily centrist business because, like you said, rejecting the election claims is by far moving very far to the right at this point. I don't really think once you get to that level, even if he doesn't necessarily believe and does so just for political advance, for political gain, I really don't think at that point that like he can necessarily call himself a centrist and do so properly. Like he also for example, he would say he's centrist, like he would say that he believes in climate change, but then when he's pressed on it, for example, since he's such a strong Trump supporter, he's pressed on the fact that Trump doesn't believe in climate change and he still supports Trump. He's very quiet on that regard. He's very quiet on Trump's outlandish claims of it being a hoax, and he's also very quiet on actually not very quiet, but he goes on Fox News, and when he's pressed on very regular things like the bipartisan infrastructure bill, for example, he would say he's against it, and then when he's asked why it's bad, he would literally just start just talk about socialism over and over again and not have any real substantive points. So like I think while yeah, he might maybe be centrist generally, like he's definitely moved very far to the right, but yeah, my positions are very different, very much so ideologically and ideologically pointed. I have very personal reasons and very good reasons of my belief systems, and I can justify them properly. So it's very
So,
different.
so could you name like your top four or five priorities if you were elected to Congress?
So in, it, my four priorities definitely would be, well, number one, you can't really get anything done without having to tackle the corruption in our society. Like that's number one. That's like it's not necessarily the most important thing, as in it's not the most vital thing for our society. It's not gonna it's not like people for example are dying because they don't have health care. So I understand that there are more pressing matters to attend to of that are subject to people's lives and whether they'll be able to live or not. But a lot of like these things won't really be passed unless we deal with the corruption of our society. So that's just it may not be the most important thing, but it's the first thing we have to deal with. Number one, like we can't get anything done with the way our campaign finances are set up. We have to have a public form of financing for campaigns of some kind, or we're just not going to get anything done. So that's number one for sure,
So
just
so
because of
does
its
does that mean HR 1 the for the People's Act?
I was thinking I was thinking something more robust, done something like democracy vouchers in Washington, which they have for their state. Sorry, not Washington State, for Seattle. They have it for their city council races, and also for like they're gonna do mayoral races on 2022 as well, or I think 2024 with the democracy voucher is gonna be a thing. But I was thinking expanding it to be more federally, maybe about $200 a month per not a month, $200 per eligible voter. So that's going to be there's like 248 million or so voters in America. So that's going to be um if I remember correctly, I think it was like I think it was something like around 400, like 200 something $billion. It's not a whole, it's not an impossible amount, but something slightly more robust than that, and something that where people can choose, because if a lot of the public financing in our country that is happening right now is clean public financing, where people make a certain amount and then the government gives you an amount depending on the kind of race that you're running. So like if you're running a mayoral race, it'd be different than if you're running a congressional race, and that's fine. But the amount of money you get and how the amount of money you need to raise is completely dependent on the government. They decide how much you need to raise first and how much they'll give you, which is it's easy for them to manipulate. It's easy for them to undermine the races. They can just make it hard, like they can just make it a high amount you have to raise first, and then also make it a low amount that they'll give you afterwards. It's best to always give people the agency when it comes to these financing things. So I would prefer a more voucher system instead than like a clean public financing.
Okay. Yeah.
That's definitely going to be the number one. After that, it's going to be education. Our education system in our society is very poor, and it needs to change. That's another priority. These aren't necessarily in particular order, other than the public financing. Like removing corruption is definitely number one. After that, these aren't necessarily in particular order, but they are all of the same importance to me. So education would be next. Something similar to what Finland has,
Mhm.
where they have extremely high results, but they don't have the same kind of conformity. They don't have the same kind of austerity that like Southeast Asian countries have, which are or East Asian countries as well, which those countries have similar results to Finland, but are a lot more strict, a lot more conformist, and a lot more austere than Finland. Um, it's it shows a lot that Finland can actually compete in results with these countries, but also have a very more relaxed society when it comes to education. Like kids in Finland don't actually have a standardized test to the equivalent of the end of middle school in the United States. That's how long they wait before getting like a actual standardized test. So that's the contrast between that, like a East Asian country, for example, who have very similar results. And then after that would be definitely healthcare. We need healthcare for our country federally, but we can also, like in the meantime, we can't really rely, at least in Florida, we can't really rely for the federal government to get its act together. It's going to take time, definitely, for us to get Medicare for all. I mean, Biden promised the public option, but that still hasn't materialized yet, and that's one of his campaign promises. Medicare for all is going to take time. That's just there's no way around it. But um, Florida can actually it's a very wealthy state. They have a lot of money in terms of budget, and they can actually provide some sort of universal health care for their state necessarily before even the federal government. So healthcare is also very important to me. Pushing that to make sure that everybody in Florida and the country overall is covered in some sort of public health care. I would prefer a Medicare for all system, but if I but in the meantime, before we get to that level, if I have to accept a public option from Biden before then I will. But the end goal is 100% something more robust like Medicare for all. And the lastly would be the the um, the $15 minimum wage, or actually the environment. So like those are kind of equal to me because the environment is important, but it's also important to make sure that people have economic mobility. Like I lived most of my life in complete poverty, in very deep poverty. If you want to like use these Census Bureau classifications, like the lowest level is deep poverty, and that's how I live my life. So it's important to me that people have some kind of socioeconomic mobility where they aren't in complete destitution, but then also the environment is also extremely important. So I would say like those are equal to me as well.
Since you mentioned this, I'd like to hear a little bit about your background, your childhood, your where you studied.
Yeah. Let's see where I can start because I want to start pretty far back. So I grew up mostly when I was a kid. When I was born, my mom lived with her sister, so like my aunt, and it was a fairly decent childhood. When I was very young, yeah, it's I don't remember much of it, so this part of my life is not the most impactful, but I wasn't born in deep poverty. My mom lived with her sister, and about like the age of like when I was going to fourth grade or so, we moved because that kind of environment was going to last forever. They both have to have their own lives eventually. And and then so we moved, and my mom was by herself at that point. And well, my mom was struggling even when we lived with my aunt. But after she was by herself, it was almost completely untenable for her for her to have any kind of proper financial structure. I mean, she has four kids at that time. I was the middle child, and so a single parent with four kids is going to be, unless you are already independently wealthy, you're not going to have a decent financial structure for that kind of family. So it's statistically you need two parents no matter the whether it's two moms, two dads, one mom, one dad, however it's structured, you need two parents to have any kind of financial stability. And even then, even with two parents, it's a struggle. So with four kids, my mom by herself, it was an immediately it was an immediate change, at least from my sense, because I didn't really notice a lot of the struggle as a kid. You don't really get told the finances and how things are troubling for you. But once you get to the point where my mom was by herself, the change is immediate. It was sudden. Like it wasn't there was no gradual decline. It was from my perspective stable to extremely unstable. So it was very jarring for me as a kid. You can imagine the impact it had from being in a stable household with two adults to an unstable household with just my mom. And as a single parent, she had a difficult decision to make, which was work in a way that would make her essentially unavailable for the most part, or be around more and be there more to raise us, but then have a lot less money because she can't be in both places at once. She more or less decided to be around more, so it did impact her more financially, but I don't necessarily think that was the wrong decision at the end of the day, like if I look back at it now. But that also contributed to the fact that we grew up in deep poverty. So I grew up most of my life in West Perrine. That is still in the district actually that I am running in, but it's one of the poorest districts. The district is fairly middle class for the most part, but West Prine is definitely the poorest area of the district for sure. It was historically redlined. It's a majority Black district, so it's poor, mostly by design for the most part, not necessarily because of like our society has a good way of trying to convince people that when you're poor, it's due to a lack of morality. Like if you had a better moral character, then you would also have better finances. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, which is not necessarily the case. There's a lot of external factors that contribute to somebody's financial decline that isn't necessarily have anything to do with their morality. So if you look at the history of the area, it's understandable why it's poor. And and that's where I grew up most of my life. That's what I remember the most from my life. And it's not a childhood that I would want anyone to have, really. It's not an experience that is good for anyone to have, especially not in the richest nation on earth. And the most tragic thing is that while my childhood was rough and I struggled a lot because of my my socioeconomic position, it's actually not the worst position you can be in. There's actually people who lived harder lives and struggled even more than I have, which, like I said, in the richest country on earth is almost completely untenable. It's unacceptable almost that we allow this, and it's a political decision that we allow, that we decide to condone this. It's not it is we don't have there's no this level of poverty doesn't exist in most developed nations in the world, but yet we continue to allow such such abhorrent levels of inequality. I mean, to a point where it our society, while we're not, the level of poverty is not as bad as some third world countries. The disparity between the rich and the poor is worse in some third world countries, and it's completely unacceptable. And growing up, for the most part, my education has been through regular public schooling until around high school. Around then, I just I just wasn't really conducive to public schooling. The authority, the confirmation the confirmation to authority has just never been my easy for me. Usually when, for example, I do something wrong, I expect an explanation. But usually it's like do what I say because I say so kind of reaction that a lot of teachers had. And it never really sat well with me. I just never really did well in the educational system the way the education is structured. So after about high school, I had pretty much enough of it. There's only really two types of people in this society because our education is so bad. There's only two types of people: those who go through the education system and know it's complete nonsense. They'll go through it anyway because they have to, because it's necessary for what they want to do. Or somebody who knows it's terrible but can't stand it and can't go through the whole thing. I definitely fall like through the second camp after high school. Sorry, not after high school, after middle school, going into high school. I did about a year or so of high school. Um, I tried it virtually because I didn't want to do middle school. I didn't want to continue going through the school system normally. But as a kid, I mean, virtual school is difficult for adults when they're doing it in college. As a kid, I just didn't have the discipline to do it virtually. So after a year of that and being unsuccessful, I just decided to take my GED and just skip the nonsense entirely. And I waited. I was pretty young still. I was like 16 when I took my GED. So I waited a year to go to college. And after that, I noticed that nothing really changed too much in college. It's mostly a lot of the same, but now you're expected to pay for everything. Like before in public school, before college, everything was given to you, your books, your curriculum, all that stuff was handed to you directly. Now a lot of it's the same. You get a little bit more freedom. It's not as much oversight, but you're an adult, so that's expected. It'd be kind of strange for them to have that much oversight for an adult. But now you're for some reason expected to pay for every little thing, like your books, your curriculum, everything is commodified as soon as you reach college. Like it's just a switch that's flipped for no reason. Like it just makes no sense.
Yeah,
Even public
yeah.
schools and colleges, everything, every small thing is nickel and dime. So um it, it's I also didn't really do well in terms of continuing going to college. And also my family at the time, we were really struggling back then anyway. So I decided just to find a job and work around the age of 17 or so. And I've been doing that for the most part. Now I work for a company doing SEO work at the technical end of SEO. So I actually came out pretty well, but a lot of it is due mostly to luck. So while I definitely moved up in the socioeconomic ladder, it's in spite of the difficulties that this country places on you, not because of how well this country lets you move through it.
Okay. Now, I'd like to do like a short, like a back and forth with like maximum 30-second response to each of those on regarding your positions.
Sure.
So the first one would be defund the police.
So defund the police, I definitely support the notion of it. It's basically a lot of people consider defund the police, abolish the police. Like they just immediately assume defund the police means to get rid of all money to the police. It's just what defund the police is retroactively removing, not retroactively, sorry, it's actively removing unnecessary responsibilities from the police. Where like we call the police for every little dispute, every small argument, for mental health crises, the police are like a hammer. They're a single tool in the toolbox, and we use them for everything. So if you only have a hammer in your toolbox, everything is going to be a nail. So defund the police just means diversify your toolbox and stop using the hammer all the time. as the police gets called less, and they need to do less, they're going to need less funding because their responsibilities are diminished. So you diminish the amount of funding in relation to the amount of responsibilities that are diminished. Doesn't mean that they're not going to have funding. They're probably going to have proportionally more funding because they're going to need more training. They're going to need better better de-escalation tactics, a lot of different things. It's going to proportionally be probably more funding, but nominally we're going to be removing funding because they're going to be removing responsibilities and then moving that responsibilities to people who are more qualified, for example, mental health cases to particular social workers. So that's it makes a lot of sense, and I definitely support the defund the police
Okay.
initiative.
Yeah. Okay. In 30 seconds or less, GND, Green New
Mhm.
Deal.
Yeah, the Green New Deal, it's not necessarily a proposal yet, but it unfortunately doesn't really go far enough, really. Like we need a radical restructuring of our not just our country, but the globe's um, uh, uh, carbon emissions. It's Green New Deal is good, and there's a lot of good stuff in it, even though there's stuff that's not necessarily particular about the environment, which I don't necessarily agree with in an environmental bill, but it needs to go further. By 2050, we need to have global zero emissions, not just the United States. So while I support it because it's the most radical thing we have so far in terms of climate, it actually needs to go beyond that furthermore.
Okay. M4A, Medical for All.
Medicare for all is I 100% agree. I'm 100% for it. It particularly because it prevents private companies from competing for duplicative care. That way, they can't undermine in any way. Because if they're going to try to use nefarious ways to get people off the government system and be on their own system, and try to get people who are young and don't need it to move away from any kind of government system into their own system. But those are also the people who are necessary for any kind of system to work because they are part of the overall funding pool.
Hmm?
So I definitely agree with Medicare for all, especially because particularly it doesn't allow for competing of duplicative care.
Okay. Again, briefly, For the People Act.
So for the People Act, that's the public financing of campaigns, right?
Hmm?
Yeah, I agree with it in terms of the goal, but I want something more robust, something more also that gives people a lot more agency. That it's something that would really give people the largest voice per person, that it would really reduce the level of influence of corporate money in our society. So definitely agree with the goal, but I want something that goes a little further than for the People's Act.
Okay. What about Supreme Court expansion or reform?
So the Supreme Court reform is necessary, but expansion is not quite the solution because uh, anything we do to expand it could easily be done when the Republicans are in power. And then when they expand it and we come back in power, we expand it again to fight their expansion. It becomes this feedback loop, and then eventually it becomes pointless. If we're just going to have over 100 judges at that point, just expanding it over and over again. Reform is necessary, but for the most part, I think the Supreme Court generally is um, inherently a anti-democratic institution. I think we should have ways that make the Supreme Court a lot more accountable or remove it entirely. So it's reform I agree, but not necessarily particularly expansion, only because it would just be a constant back and forth feedback loop that would just make it it would
Right.
make it
Right.
a worse situation.
Okay. What about you already stated the $15 minimum wage was one of your uh, important points.
Right. Yeah. $15 minimum wage is definitely very important to me. I just think people need to have the ability to live comfortable, prosperous lives without having to struggle for no matter where you're born, who you're born to, in what circumstances you're born. As long as you're in this country, you will live a comfortable, prosperous life, and that's something that we can give to everybody. It's not. It doesn't have to be a zero sum game. So
Um, uh, what about filibuster?
the filibuster is just a way for to increase gridlock and prevent any kind of democratic action. The filibuster needs to go. It doesn't help in any regard. Only a vehicle for obstruction, and we already have enough of those built into our institution to create gridlock. We don't need the filibuster to add on to that. So yes, definitely needs to be removed.
All right, great. That's pretty much it. And finally, I just wanted to ask you what in your opinion positions you best to be for this job.
Yeah, I mean, there's really nothing you can do to prepare for the job. There's not like any kind of congressman school, you know. But what positions me the best, in my opinion, is I do have a particularly unique set of beliefs and knowledge that I've gained from living a unusual life and having a personal interest in economics and history and geopolitics. I read a lot on from different people like David Hume, from Yanis Varoufakis, from you know Gore Vidal. There's a lot of different authors that I read just because those things interest me. But that's not. But I'm not saying you have to be extremely knowledgeable on these topics to be a congressman. But it's something that I have a personal interest in, that I have my free time, and I take my free time personally to do this because it's interesting to me. But generally, what makes me the most viable for this position is the fact that I am just a regular person, somebody who exists in this country, who eats the same food that everyone else eats, sleeps in the same type of bed, and works the same types of job that they work. I struggle the same kind of struggles that they have, and I continue to struggle those struggles. So like I know exactly the type of things that would benefit people because they would benefit me. I am not somebody who can be easily, uh, for the lack of a better word, I would say corrupted necessarily. Living the life I lived with the poverty that I lived through leaves almost like a scar that you can't remove. It's something that is ingrained in me, and you can't talk your way out of me not believing the things I believe. If I'm in Congress, it's not, you can't promise me a new position in a new different seat, or can't promise me a committee seat that will make me go against my fundamental belief systems, because it, it, it's the struggles I lived, it informs my belief system, and it's so ingrained in me because I lived my entire life in poverty that I can't be in Congress and not work my hardest to fundamentally change the worst parts of society that uh, lost the word, that
Yeah.
basically contributed to my poverty. So and that I would say that's the reason why I am the most likely to, or the most viable option for
And
this race.
and I'm just curious, are you a student of modern monetary theory?
I understand the concept. It works really only because the United States is the world reserve currency, and we have a global market. So it's we're particularly uniquely in a position that prevents a lot of the dangers of hyperinflation, and we can work around that a lot easier. But that also means that to continue modern monetary theory, we have to maintain the United States global hegemony. So while I definitely agree it's very useful for us in the short term, it's not a long-term goal because that means that we have to maintain the United States empire around the globe and maintain the United States world hegemony for it to be particularly viable. So um, I'm of two minds about it for that reason.
Right, I understand. All right, well, I wish you the best of luck with your run. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope once you get into office, you'll visit us again.
No, definitely. I really appreciate you having me on. It was a great honor, and I would love to do this again when I get into office or even before, honestly.
Great. Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Thank you very much again, and see you later. Bye bye.
But have a great night. I appreciate it.